G'day Eagles fans, welcome back to True Eagle. The trade deadline day has come and gone. I've already done a trade deadline day reaction as well as a 2-hour live stream earlier today. So this is video number 3 for the day. I just wanted to do a little check-in on the trade itself for Tom Barrass. And then, over the next couple of days, I'll be working on a trade period review in total for everyone on True Footy, and then a Eagles one as well. So yeah, today the deal got done. If you somehow missed it, we ended up getting a future first, future second, and a future third for Tom Barrass in exchange for TB and our own future fourth next season. All of those selections are tied to Hawthorn. Carlton has nothing to do with it. So yeah, first of all, I suppose there may have been some doubt in some corners that this deal was going to go through. I never really had any doubt that we were going to get Barrass to Hawthorn. My belief that despite, what was flooding my comment sections from Hawthorn fans, I suppose there was a bit of a prevailing suggestion that Hawthorn weren't super keen on Barrass and they were prepared to walk away. That was something that I didn't really believe. I think both teams, regardless of posturing, wanted to get this deal done. For us, I think where it sat going into this day was we were offered a future first and a future second, and we provide a future third back. So all in all, we actually were sort of vindicated for holding off just a little bit. Now, we didn't get probably what we were absolutely hoping for. I think West Coast had asked for Hawthorn and Carlton's future firsts from Hawthorn in exchange for this. We didn't get that, but most people would have thought we were delusional for even hoping for that. I wasn't really hoping for it. Naturally, I always hope for the best case scenario. But I thought we might accept something along the lines of just a future one and a future two. So in the end, we actually extracted a little bit more value by letting it go so long. And Hawthorn naturally really wanted Barrass because that is a decent offer. I would have to conclude, I think the compensation we've got for Tom Barrass in isolation is actually a fairly good deal. And now the tune will change with Hawks fans not having a shot. There's heaps of Hawks fans and a few in particular that comment on every video. I appreciate you. It was more just like a very common thread I was seeing all over the internet and even as recently as a live stream. Hawthorn wanted him. He is a potentially game-changing player for their defense next year. A really good lockdown defender. He's been a great servant for us. I think particularly in 2024, really lifted again. I think 2022 was Barrass's best season as a West Coast Eagle. I think that was the year he won the club champion. And this year he might not have won club champion. He missed a few games. And McGovern was probably the better of the two. Well, certainly was. But he still had a really good year. And there's no doubt we will feel the loss of this in terms of our immediate hopes. This is going to impact our ability to win games next year, or at least mitigate some of the huge losses. But I suppose with TB, it was always kind of going to be a case of, ripping the Band-Aid off and getting rid of someone who has value. So we did trade Jack Darling. We decided to keep Yo and we sold Barrass. So Barrass probably had a bit more reason to look elsewhere, whereas we looked after Yo for whatever reason. We do desperately need Yo to support this young midfield. You could maybe make the case that Barrass is less important when we've already got McGovern. Yo was also out of contract, so there was some impetus for us to negotiate a new contract. With TB, he really wanted us to extend his contract, which we were, unwilling to do, and it's kind of fair. So at the end of the day, we get 3 draft picks from Hawthorn, the first, second, and third selections in next year's draft. Now, it's not 2 first-round draft picks, but this does leave us with a very, very handy draft position. Now, again, it doesn't save this trade period, in terms of the sum total in and out. I'll probably save a deeper analysis for that. It probably doesn't, because at the end of the day, we really needed a presence in this year's draft for a variety of reasons. We need to obviously get the kids in now. There is a benefit to getting them in earlier. There's a stronger draft. But in terms of what we could have realistically hoped for today, the actual outcome we received is better than perhaps we were expecting. And perhaps as well, our expectations were low considering we didn't do a good job with the Carlton deal. So again, I'll take time to reflect on the trade period as a whole and decide exactly what I think of it. But if you look at it in this deal in isolation, Hawthorn do get a very good player, but he will be 30 next season. So for us, despite the fact that these are future picks and not current picks, we did extract pretty good value, and in the end, were somewhat rewarded for holding out for as long as we could. Great, so the next thing I'm going to do is get up a picture from the Instagram of Golden Wings WCE, which is another page that I follow, and he or she has done a great job of mapping out exactly what our draft hand could look like next season. So we know it's dog shit this year. We've got 12, 26, and 73. We'll get onto that, see if we can fix that. But Here you can see a bit of a mapping out of the selections we could hold. So this is a rough, approximation of where West Coast finish and Hawthorn finish. So Hawthorn could finish anywhere in the top 8. Obviously, the lower they finish, the better for us, because that will enhance our draft picks. For the record, I'm not entirely convinced Hawthorn is necessarily going to, make a grand final and win a flag. I think there's plenty of reasons to suspect that, being a hunted team next year, they don't necessarily get further into finals than they did this year. I'm not going to suggest they fall away or anything like that. So let's be real about it. Pick 2 to 5 is probably a reasonable expectation for us, and then Hawthorn's pick could be between 10 and 18. If you look on the right where it says example, that's, finding the midpoint. So if we hold 4, 14, 22, 33, 40, 51, and 76 in next year's draft, that is, we'd go into it with probably the strongest draft hand other than maybe Gold Coast. They've got their own draft picks to handle there. So what does it mean to have a really strong draft hand next year and not this year? Well, there's 3 things we could do with it. First one is just to hold the picks and take draft selections next year and rebuild the list that way. It's annoying because, there is something to be said, I think, for getting the kids in earlier. Secondly, this is also a stronger draft. And thirdly, regardless of the strength of the draft, it's also heavily compromised next year. So that in itself is not a sexy option. There is the looming question of Chad Warner, and I don't think this is going to go away. I really do think West Coast will be up to their shins, up to their neck in a Chad Warner pursuit. And this does give us a good baseline from which we can, stump up a reasonable offer for Chad Warner, who will be out of contract, and I'm hoping it doesn't cost the absolute world. But that is naturally one thing we consider. Now, there's another option I really hope we also look at as well, and we have explicitly said this. Matthew Clark said this, and Don Pike said this. Now, my trust is low a little bit with what comes out of their mouth and their ability to execute on what comes out of their mouth. However, we have expressed an interest in trying to get back in the first round of this year's draft. So we could offer any of 4, 14, 22, 33 for an equivalent pick in this year's draft. So one team I'm looking at is Richmond. Do they need all 8 first round picks they have, or 7? There's 8 in the top 24 as it currently stands. I reckon Richmond will look to condense and potentially push assets into the future for just better list balance. So there's a contender there, bearing in mind we will probably cop a little bit of a premium. I think you probably pay a bit of a premium to get into the current draft. So what, pick 4 next year, hypothetically, is that worth a pick 7 or 8 in this year's draft? Potentially. It's hard to really ascertain that, and everyone will have their own opinion about how you measure it. So we could offer our first round pick, pick 4, to get into the top 6 of this year's draft, and I'd probably be comfortable with that. It does seem unlikely we would be doing that, but that was just an example. Even if it's a future second to get into the second round of this year's draft, I think there's some value in that. I don't think, say if we flip 22 for another 24 or 25 in this year's draft, again, there's some doubt about where that pick's actually going to be. That's our future second, so it could be earlier, it could be later. But if we're able to flip that for another top 25 selection, it doesn't compromise our bid for a Chad Warner, and it allows us to get another decent talent. Now, it doesn't rectify the decision we made to trade out of the top handful of picks in this year's draft. That may not be salvageable. If there is a belief out there that this year's draft, particularly the top half a dozen or whatever, is worth trying to get into, if that is the belief, it's going to be very hard to find somebody who would be willing to trade out of this year's draft for next year's draft. However, I really hope we try. I hope we make something of this. So in conclusion, hopefully we can still make this happen. Now, there is a pick trading period that I don't know where it ends this year. I should have looked that up. But I remember last year, it ended about 2 weeks before the actual draft, or maybe 10 days or something like that. So there is still theoretically another 3 weeks where we could negotiate a trade into this year's draft. Then there is actually live trading on the night. Live trading on the night is not my preference. I feel like when you pay for it in the moment, you can risk paying an even bigger premium. So we'll see what happens there, but those are our options. We also, in my opinion, want to finalize how many list spots we've got, because if we only have 3 or 4, then we want to prepare for that in terms of how many picks we're going to take. So look, we've got some options. Overall, I'm more relaxed about it than I was before. I'm not saying I'm any happier about not having a pick in the early part of this year's draft, but I'm just less angry about it. I think I've got it out of my system now. We can kind of move on. So from here, I'm going to be holding out hope that we somehow rectify our presence in this year's draft while acknowledging The deal for Barrass today was probably as good as we realistically could have hoped. Whether it saves the trade period, I think for me, that remains to be seen. But it's not all doom and gloom. Soon, amongst all this trade period review stuff, I am going to talk in depth about what Baker and Owies offer to us. We also didn't get Dev Robinson today, by the way, which I think on balance is probably the right move. He was contracted. Unless Brisbane were going to accept pick 73 or like a future third, there just wasn't enough in it for us, I think. But overall, our objective with trading Tom Barrass was to maximize our access to young talent. So that in isolation is good. Of course, it doesn't really make up for the trade yesterday, but, I am keen to see what Baker and Owies can offer us as established players, and of course, Jack Graham. There's something, when you watch them, it's very clear that they bring stuff that West Coast doesn't have, so it's not all doom and gloom. Even if, the value of the trade yesterday, and I didn't even mean to bring up the trade again. All I'm simply saying is, soon I will be able to look at those players and really talk about what they can bring this team, and that is potentially significant. I can only stew on this bad decision for so much longer. So let me know in the comments what you think, guys. I know there's a contingent out there that didn't want to see Barrass traded at all. At the end of the day, I do think this suits all parties. I think it was always going to happen. And we extracted the value out of the trade that was reasonable. So let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Cheers.